All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining. Today, I'm going to be going over how to build a private API gateway using Winglang. First, my name's Hassan Abourian. I'm a software engineer here at Wingcloud. So for anyone who wants to follow along as we're going through this tutorial, um, we do have this slide deck available. If you are already inside of our Slack channel, you can look for, it's called Private API Gateway Workshop. So just like a quick snippet here, I'll bring it up on my screen. You should just be able to join this public channel, and the slide deck and all the commands that you'll need in order to run this are going to be available there. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start talking about private API gateways. So for this workshop, we're going to start off just a very small introduction into API gateways. We're also going to talk about what app we're building in Wing. We're going to try running this locally, deploying it to AWS, and then making it a private API gateway. And then we'll rejoice because we will have learned how to build a private API gateway using Winglang. So if you plan on following along, there's a few prerequisites you want to make sure that you've got installed as far as software is concerned. You're going to want to have the Wing CLI first and foremost, at least version 5940. And then as well, if you get the slide deck, you'll be able to download or use these links to do all the installations that you need. We're going to be using Node 20 or later. You'll also need Terraform installed, and then you'll want to have your AWS CLI credentials set up on your machine in order to follow along. So just super quick blurb about API gateways. Basically, API gateways, these act as a single entry point for all of our clients' requests into some system, directing appropriate backend services. So it gives us a way to centralize how we manage our API throttlings, our authorizations, and monitorings, etc. There's plenty of documentation out there for what an API is. Our goal today is we want to actually build an API gateway and then make it private using Winglang. So there's some starter code that we can set up for ourselves. And if you have the Wing CLI installed, we can get this starter code using the command wing new private API gateway. So as I step through all these commands, I'll kind of just do them myself as well so that we can see it work. So let me pull up my VS Code, and I will run wing new private API. This should just take a second to populate. And once it's done, we'll see that within our file explorer, we'll have a couple files created for us. The one that we want to look at first is this main.w file. So I've got in our slide deck, actually, just some bits of this outlined, right? So the starter code here, it just defines this note service that we're creating. And within the note service, there's an API resource that has a few different CRUD operations. So if we take a look at the Wing code here on the right, hopefully that, yeah, I think that's large enough. You'll see that we're making use of a cloud bucket for storing notes, and we'll be making use of a cloud API to perform the CRUD operations for our notes. And we're just going to have a few different endpoints here. We're going to have a get endpoint to be able to retrieve notes that have been saved in the system. There'll be a post where we can create new notes, and then delete for cleaning up any notes that we don't want to keep any longer. And the best way for us to play with any Wing application is to run it locally. So once you've got this template file or starter files downloaded, all you need to do is run wing it, and you will be able to play with your app. So let's go ahead and do that. All right. So once I run wing it, we can see that I've now got the Wing console pulled up. Something to note, if this is your first time using the Wing console, you'll be prompted to sign in using either GitHub or your Gmail login. But it's a one-time setup. And then once you're in, you'll be able to see all of our fun little resources that we can play with. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to take a look at this API resource. So from my API resource, we can go ahead and demo how the actual application works. So if we hop back over to our slide deck, the first thing that we want to do is we want to try creating a note. And so we'll be able to create the note in the console by clicking on the API resource. And then on the right, we get nice little tooltips here for how to actually interact and send HTTP requests to our API. Oh, sorry. Okay, so let me pop back over to my Wing console. And the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to create our first note. So I'll send the post request, and this will just be called my note. And then the body of my note will be, hello, this is my first note. And then once we hit send, I should see that the note has been saved as a response. And I can actually also click here on the bucket and see that inside of my bucket, there's a file called my note. And the contents of this are the contents of our note that we wanted to save. But we wanted to be able to interact with this through the API. So now let's go ahead and try retrieving that same note. So we'll change this to a GET request, and we use a query string. Name is equal to my note. And we can see we're returned back in our response with the contents of the actual note. And then lastly, let's test out the delete note. So we'll come back up, fix this to be slash my note. And once we send the request, we should not get this error. What did I do? Oh, I never changed it to delete. That's why the slides are more accurate than my random demo. So now I can see that the note was in fact deleted. And if I check the bucket, right, there's no longer a file here, and it has been removed from our storage of the note. So if we hop back over to our workshop slides, everything I just did, you can follow along at your own pace. You can follow along with me as we go through. All the commands are going to be here, and all of the snippets of what you'll need to do should be outlined as well. But once we've played with this application, you can continue to play with it, put some more notes in it, whatever you want to do. But once we're done playing with it locally and we're happy with the way that the application runs, the next thing we want to do is actually deploy this into the cloud. Right? That's the whole point of what we're trying to do with our awesome Wing projects. So the next few slides, we're going to discuss how to configure and use the TF AWS platform target for Terraform-based AWS deployments. So before we actually compile our code to deploy it into AWS, the other file that I want to draw some attention to is this WingToml file. So let's go back and look at our VS Code at the code that we had populated for us. And so here you'll see a WingToml. And basically, along with the main.w file that was generated here, these TOML files that are provided give us a way to give the platform that we're going to be using specific parameters that we want to use with the compilation and deployment process. So inside of this file, there are just three options that I want to draw some attention to. Everything else is commented out, and a lot of this is just helper tooltips. But the first thing is this option here called VPC. And so basically, this setting here tells the TF AWS target whether or not we should create a new VPC or use an existing one if a VPC is even needed. So the TF AWS target will only it will only generate a VPC if it's needed. The VPCs are lazy loaded. The second one is VPC Lambda and VPC API Gateway. So both of these expect a Boolean value. And essentially the purpose of these configurations are to tell the Lambda functions tell the target whether or not our Lambda functions and our API gateways. Oh, yes, sure, sorry. Is that font a little bit better, I hope? I think so. I'll keep going. So by providing VPC Lambda and VPC API Gateway as true, this is going to tell the TF AWS platform that we want to force these resources that are created to be deployed behind a VPC. But before we use that, I first want us to go ahead and just comment these out so that we can see what would happen with the default behavior of the platform. So commenting out line 5 and line 7 will make our platform ignore this forceful deployment of Lambdas and API gateways behind VPCs. So with that commented out, now we can actually compile. So in order to compile, and again, if you're following along with the slide decks, we're right here. We're just going to run wing compile -t tf AWS. So let's do that. Wing compile -t tf AWS. And that just takes a moment. Once it's complete, we can actually take a look here at our target folder, and there'll be a main.tf AWS folder that we can browse. And within this folder are all the necessary artifacts that are going to be needed in order to deploy the application that we were just playing with locally in our Wing console to AWS using Terraform. So feel free to browse through here as much as you want. Probably the most interesting stuff is inside of main .tf.json, where actually it's all the actual Terraform declarations are for the resources that we're going to be deploying. And then once you're done playing around with that, we'll just go ahead and deploy this. So in order to deploy this to the cloud, the first thing we'll want to do is run a Terraform init command on that directory. It just takes a second. And then once the initialization of the backend and everything is complete, in just a moment, we can run a Terraform apply. And so once the apply is complete, what's going to happen is we're going to be presented with a Terraform plan. And if you've used Terraform, I'm sure you're familiar with this. But we can see that we're going to be deploying 44 resources. So these are all the resources inside of our application that are required to build this note-taking app. So it's going to create our API gateway. It's going to create the Lambda function for the endpoints that are required, set up all the permissions that are needed for this to work. So let's go ahead and just say yes. And this should only take a moment to complete. And any second now. Wonderful. So now I can see that 44 resources were created. And then within my Terraform output, I have a URL that's going to be the URL for how to hit the actual API that was deployed. And so I'm going to copy this guy here. And if we refer back to the workshop slides, now let's test this out while it's been deployed to the cloud. So you can feel free to use Postman or Insomnia or any other tools you want to use for testing hitting endpoints. For the sake of this demo, I'm just going to use some curl commands to make sure that this all works. So I will copy these commands one at a time, just so we can ensure that our create, read, and delete still work. But a reminder, you will need to update these commands with the URL that you were given from the Terraform output. So delete, I will copy. Right, and we can see now this says that my note was saved. And in order for us to actually confirm that this note was saved, we can just hop over to the AWS console. That is not, there we go. And I'm going to go to AWS S3. And I should have a bucket that was just created called My Notes. I sure do. And within the bucket My Notes, we can see that there is that file that's storing all the data for the note that we wanted to preserve inside of our service. So let's test the rest of the endpoints. The next thing we want to do is read that note back. So we'll just use a curl. Oh, there we go. Name is my note. Let me copy the commands. Okay, going, oh, so there we go. Place this URL with the URL that we got from our Terraform output. And we can see there's the contents of my first note. I'm actually not sure what I did wrong with the previous command, but whatever, we'll move on. Oh, I didn't hit the /noting point. That was my fault. So now we can see that we're able to get back our notes contents. And if we just swap this to a delete, we're going to test our ability to delete the note as well. And successfully, I was told that my note was indeed deleted. And if I hop back over to the AWS console, if I refresh the objects inside of my S3 bucket, we can see that they are gone. So let's go back to our slides. This is great. We were able to test out that all these endpoints worked when this API is public, right? So obviously that's not the point of the workshop. We want to make this private. But just before we make it private, let's go over to the API that was created inside of our AWS console and see the configuration settings before we change everything to be private. So if I go to API, gateway, I should only have one in this account. I sure do. And we can see that here are all the endpoints that are defined. And if we go to our settings, the endpoint type is edge. There is no private settings on this API. It's public, right? And now what we want to do is we want to go back to our code and change this so that we're going to actually deploy the same service and API, but behind a VPC using a private API gateway. So the first step is just so that we can keep everything clean and collected. We'll run this Terraform destroy command just to destroy everything we deployed, because it makes it easier to compare how many resources are getting created. All right. And now the next thing that we want to do is we want to hop back over and revisit our WingToml file, where we commented out the VPC Lambda and VPC API gateway values. And so we want to reset these values back to true. So once it's done, it's just going to look like the original file with lines 5 and 7 uncommented. So I'll hop back over into my WingToml and uncomment those 2 lines and save. And so now the TF-AWS target, when we recompile, is going to know that we want these to be behind VPCs, which inherently will make our API gateway private. So let's now recompile again. So it's just the same compile command. We don't have to do anything different. We just need to recompile using the target with those values now set inside of our TOML file. So wing compile -t TF-AWS. And just as before, we're still going to look at the same folder. We're still going to have all these same artifacts. The main difference is that if we actually take some time to go through and look at the Terraform resources that are generated, if we look at a Lambda function that's being created, we'll see now there's going to be the additional VPC config blocks that are populated, where our Lambdas are going to be using security groups, and they're going to be assigned onto subnets. For the sake of this workshop, I'm just going to allow Wing to create a brand new VPC. If you have your own VPC, or if you wanted to test out deploying this to an existing VPC, you can change this value to existing, but then you'll need to go ahead and provide the VPC ID you want to use, as well as any public or private subnets that you want to provide. But for simplicity's sake, I'll just let Wing create this for me. And then the other thing that's going to be interesting here is if we look for our API gateway, there we go. We can see that within the Terraform definitions that this type is now private, and it's going to be using VPC endpoints so that we can communicate on our private subnets when we're trying to hit this and execute endpoints. So let's go ahead and deploy this. So the deploy command, we're just going to rerun Terraform apply. Since we already initialized our backend with the first time we deployed it, we don't need to rerun the initialization command. But this guy here, once we run, does take about 4 or 5 minutes, because deploying these Lambdas with VPC configs is a little bit time consuming. One key difference to note here is now we're going to be creating, rather than 44 resources like we saw previously, this is now creating 62 resources. So quite a bit more. Most of that is because it has to create the VPC. It's going to create private public subnets. It's going to create all the route tables that are required. If you brought your own existing VPC, it would probably be less. I'm not sure what the number is, but still more than 44. And again, this all changed because we simply came in and changed the configuration inside of our WingToML. And that's kind of the only flag that we needed to give for the TF AWS target to know what to do. So this is going to take maybe 3 or 4 minutes. Um, in the meantime, I can kind of check and see. I haven't been looking at the chat to see if anyone's got any questions or if anyone's stuck, if you're following along. Uh, Again, if you wanted to follow along yourself, or you wanted to get these slide decks, please hop over to our Slack channel. I'm sure we'll make this available too in other places. But right now, if you go to our Slack channel, inside of the private API Gateway workshop, you'll find all these slides here that you can use and play with this as well. Create a new VPC template. Yeah, I definitely typically would never recommend using the default VPC. Really, if you wanted to follow along with this tutorial and you just wanted to create a brand new VPC to play around with, like using an existing resource, you don't have to do anything crazy. The AWS console, if you go through the here, I'll just show the steps since we have some time to kill. Right, so if we just create a VPC, we'll select VPC and more. Really, for the demonstration's sake, you can get away with just one availability zone. You don't really need any public subnets and at least one private subnet. And that configuration should be all you need in order to create a VPC that will work here, right? The only caveat when you bring your own VPC is you are setting up all the networking yourself, and there is a chance that your VPC that you brought won't necessarily work with the way that we need to hit the VPC endpoints on the private subnets. But if you just follow those default steps, you should have a VPC that would work out of the box. Uh, yeah. It's times like this that I wish I had like Eyal here to fill in some dead space with his great comedy. But we should only be another 2 minutes before we're ready to go ahead and test this out and see if things work. Actually, I guess this is a good time to hop back into the Wing code and talk about what else is here inside of this template that comes with the Wing new private API. So alongside creating this note service, towards the bottom, there are some functions that are defined as well. And so these consumer functions, we're just going to be using them once we've deployed the private API gateway completely to test it. So these consumer functions that you're finding, if you're looking through the Wing code, they're totally not required in order for the app to work. But because we're deploying the API privately onto a private subnet beyond VPC, we need some way to like easily interact and see that these CRUD endpoints still work. And so these Lambda functions are just designed to be that, right? We're going to have a Lambda function that will allow us to test out the put endpoint. We'll have another function that lets us test the leading, and another one that lets us test get. So in a few slides, once we get there, you'll see that we're going to be invoking Lambdas, kind of using like this custom format of bodies that or payloads that we're sending to them. And this will purely be for tests. I'm very glad that you're here in the comments. Yeah, I feel better knowing that you're there. Yeah. So as far as oh, oh, that's interesting. Let's see if we can fix this. You run this demo about 100 times and it waits until you're live for something to actually blow up. All right, let's give that a second to resolve. So as well as like creating these resources for you, Anything like the security groups and permissions, those are all discerned from your Wing code. So when it comes to like ensuring that any of the Lambda functions that that need access to the API gateways endpoints are on the right subnets, this is all determined through our analysis of your Wing code. Hmm. So it looks like the only thing that failed was the delete endpoint. Let me go over to the AWS console and see if everything else got deployed fine. If it did, we can go ahead and start playing with this.
Hello.
Whoa. Oh, how are you
Hello,
doing, man?
I'm doing good. So what's not
Good.
working, Hassan?
Dude, probably everything. But we're gonna chalk it up to a fluke. I think that's what's going on. But we've got enough to deployed here to actually play with it, I think.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
yeah, so let's grab the API endpoint.
It's very hard to find the URL. This is
I
something that
know.
it's very, very hard. It's it's dashboard, maybe in dashboard. No,
Dashboard.
maybe where
There it
you
is.
are. Yeah. It's
I got
crazy
it.
hard to find the URL. Yeah.
I've gotten so used to just the Terraform output being like my source of where I grab this from, I've forgotten the console.
No, I believe
Right.
they keep changing the location of the URL just to keep us alerted. It's impossible.
So yeah, let's just test rerunning that create command. All right, so I'll grab this back from the slides, and we'll grab this guy. And change this endpoint to see if we can actually hit this API now. Sorry, my copy and paste skills are slow, to say the best. And we get this could not resolve host, which is totally what we expect, right? And the reason why we expect this is now because if we look at the API that was deployed, this is a private endpoint type. It's not going to be accessible over the public internet, and it's going to be using VPC endpoints in order for us to be able to hit it. But even with that said, like I was mentioning our consumer functions. This is how we're actually going to play around with checking that these endpoints work. So the consumer functions finally come into play. So if we, yeah, again, I showed this Wing code. It's explained here in the slides as well. But these three consumers, they get translated into Lambda functions. So I'm going to hop over to the Lambda dashboard so that I can get the name of these functions. And I didn't take any time to actually clean up my AWS account, so ignore like the 100 Lambdas that are there. All right. And we will test out calling this bad boy. And actually, I'm going to grab the command from the slides because that's the easiest thing. So we're going to run this AWS Lambda invoke command.
Nice.
We're going to be passing in the payload of the note that we want to put, and then we're just going to read the response. So the only thing that you need to do is replace the name of the Lambda function with your Lambda. And because you're here, yeah, I know for a fact this is going to work.
Let's see.
You know, I'm ready. I need to recopy that. Wonderful. I was on the edge of my seat, actually.
Nice.
So we get this note N1 was saved, right? So let's hop over to S3 and just make sure that that note actually did get stored. There they are. And there's N1. And so additionally, like we can go through here and we can also test out I know delete is still deploying. So I'm just going to test reading this note back out, and then we'll move on to like the grand finale.
Nice.
So same gist here. We're going to invoke the Lambda function. Yeah, right. The demo gods, please be kind. We're almost done with the demonstration. So like we only need a few more bits of luck, and then we can walk under some ladders. All right, and I'll grab the name of this Lambda function. Sweet. So yeah, now we can see that we got the note back out. All right. So basically, at this point, we're done. We've now taken our API and this note-taking app that's backed by the API with the credit endpoint, and we've turned it into a private API gateway. And we're also able to define functions that can interact with this. And from the code sake, like if we take back a look at our Wing code, there's nothing here that is specific to a private API, right? This is a concern of the platform, of the TF AWS platform that deploys it. So whether we're playing with this locally, whether we're deploying it publicly in the cloud or privately in the cloud, the behavior of our application all works and stays the same everywhere. So if you're following along, once you're done with that, you're welcome to go ahead and clean up. You just run the Terraform destroy command. Caveat, this takes like 20 minutes to fully destroy everything. So like
that's crazy, right?
tough.
I mean,
it's the ENIs that take the longest time, it feels like, for Terraform to clean them up. Yeah, I feel like sometimes I've got better luck going into the console and cleaning them up myself, and then running the Terraform destroy to like fix the state. But
yeah. Well, I ran out of VPCs at one point, and I had to delete so many stuff from the console. It's crazy.
Yeah,
crazy.
It's definitely like the messiest cleanup, right? Like VPCs are one of the worst ones to clean up, especially if you didn't define it all in Terraform or something.
Yep, exactly.
Well, cool. So that's it. You're done. If you're following along with the workshop, feel free to go back in and like play around, tweak the app some more, add some more features. If you want some additional resources, I've included a slide here where we've got some more Wing blogs. We've got some more docs that dive deeper into this. Really, the highlight of this is we're showing off like what our platforms can do, right? Like the Terraform AWS platform is just can be configured to change the behavior of the compilation. And if you're curious into like what else platforms can do, I highly recommend diving into our docs about platforms and maybe write your own platforms as well to play around with our custom platform options. And like, as always, whether or not you're just interested in chatting or if you had issues with the workshop, join our Slack community, and we'd love to hear some feedback. I am totally open to if we've got questions now.
What does it mean to isolate these resources? Do you know, Hassan?
I'm not quite sure. Bro Nifty, would you mind elaborating? For instance, a separate root account.
Oh, got it.
Yeah. So separate account,
okay.
multi-account. This is it's something that's in the roadmap, but currently not well defined. But it's definitely something that is possible to support. We just aren't doing it yet.
Yep, makes a lot of sense. I've heard this from people. People are using multiple accounts in many shapes. It's interesting to see what people are actually doing with it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a pretty big like AWS best practice guides for these multi-account strategies, and it seems like there's a nice standard coming forth. Yeah, Bro Nifty for sure. Like, if you've got some ideas, we'd love to hear them. And especially on enhancing this workshop or even just changing the way that this TF AWS target's doing. Totally welcome to start a discussion, we can talk about it via Slack. We can also do GitHub discussions. Yeah.
Great. So Hassan, when I heard that you would I just jumped into the call. I hope it was okay for you. I mean, it's, yeah.
You're like a superhero.
I saw your Terraform loading, and I said, yeah, that's my cue.
I mean, you're right on cue, man. I can't thank you enough. I actually don't think the demo would have worked without you here.
Oh, it's a crazy demo, right? I mean, it's difference. I mean, the fact that there's only a semantic difference between doing. I mean, if you're doing the same functional stuff and you put it behind a VPC, it kind of makes sense if you don't know the. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to put behind the VPC, and there's so much work to be done. It's pretty crazy that it works out of the box. Does it take care only for lambdas? Are there any other stuff that needs to be? I mean, I'm wondering. I'm not that familiar with VPCs. What goes behind the VPC? I mean, the API gateway, Lambda function. A bucket can go behind the VPC, right? Or can it?
No. So right now, the only things that this is taken care of is, or only thing it supports right now are the lambdas and the API gateways. And
Right.
I agree with you that it's really cool because this kind of illustrates the power of this idea of our division between the application code and like
Right.
the platform's concerns, right? Um, which is really cool because like this is kind of uh, like a gateway to this an endless amount of possibilities, like for what platform concerns are and what custom platforms might be able to handle and take care of. But yeah, as of today, we just do the API gateways and lambdas for this.
Makes
But
sense.
more's to come as we kind of evolve
Yep.
our resources.
Awesome. And great job, Hassan. It's I've kind of demoed this before, and it worked out of the box for me. Crazy.
It's good until I break like any of these
The S, yeah.
the
The
S. Yeah,
IDs, yes. And an S, yeah.
that was your contribution, right? You fixed that. That was
I fixed the yeah. I fixed the what was it that I fixed? The template.
yeah. The template was missing the S here.
Yeah,
That was some good work,
exactly.
man. That was
Exactly.
some of my
Exactly.
favorite PRs actually.
Yeah.
The
Yeah,
ones that
me
I
too.
break and other people fix, that's my favorite stuff.
Me, the one that I just need to add an S and that's it, and it works. These are my favorite. I mean, my favorite PRs is the one that I only delete code, but it's more
Those
well.
ones, those are good too. Those are definitely good too.
Nice.
Cool. Cool. I don't see anything else coming through, but again, like the way that the workshop slides are set up is if you didn't follow along or if you want to play with this on your own time, feel free to. And again, any questions, concerns, find us on GitHub, find us on Slack. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, Hassan. Thank you. Thank you for having
Bye.
me here.
Oh, thank
Bye.
you for being here. It's an honor. Let's see.